Yes, hello, good afternoon or good morning, good evening, depending wherever you are. I'm pretty delighted to welcome you to today's online lecture, German Colonial Architecture from Contested History to Shared Built Heritage, an event related to ICOMOS Germany's working group Shared Built Heritage. So today we will delve into the complex legacy of German colonial architecture. These are structures that endure in Africa, Asia, and Oceania, and which have evolved into deeply ambivalent heritage sites in today's independent nations. So these buildings, urban ensembles, cultural landscapes, and infrastructural systems bear witness to a pretty violent area that demands our attention, reflection, and also dialogue. So as we know, the German colonial empire, though shorter lived and smaller than others, was no less brutal. And its legacy continues to shape relationships between Germany and its former colonies. So while political and legal resolutions remain outstanding, for our focus today is on the built environment, how it is studied, taught, and designed with in mind its contested past. So we will take today also a closer look at the Alte Feste in Namibia, which is a prime example of shared heritage. And via this example, we will examine how these sites can be understood, preserved, and integrated into contemporary narratives. This event now today builds on the momentum of the 2023 conference at TU Munich, which was a cooperation between TU Munich and ICOMOS Germany, and also the open access publication Monuments and Sites de-colonial. So you have a link to this publication in the flyer, and you use this open access so you can read the publication and see what has been discussed during the conference. And it also aims to foster scientific discussion, public outreach, and architectural practice in addressing these challenges. It also marks an effort to reactivate the ICOMOS Germany working group on shared built heritage. So we're always looking for new and interested members in the working groups, and also here, if you are interested or if this is a topic you would like to dive into, you're very much welcome. To join forces and to join the working group. I'm very grateful to Michael Falser for his leadership in advancing this topic, as well as to Jens Wiedow and Jaco Wasserfall for sharing their insights today from research and practice in Namibia. And their contributions promise to enrich our understanding and inspire further collaboration. And of course, Dörte Helmut has facilitated not only today's meeting, but also plays a crucial role in activating our working groups. So finally, thank you all for joining us today. Let's make this time together productive. I look forward to the presentations and our discussions. We will hear three presentations, around 15 minutes each, and we'll have a joint discussion at the end. So please therefore make a note of your questions so that you don't forget the questions during the other presentations. And I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Michael Falser. He's an architectural historian and associate professor at the Institute of Art History at Heidelberg University. And since 2020, he was funded through the Heisenberg program of the German Research Foundation for his research project about the history and heritage of German colonial architecture. Currently, he's preparing a two-volume monograph with the writer about his photographic building surveys in Africa, Asia, and Oceania, and also works as a co-curator at the German Railway Museum in Nuremberg to conceive an exhibition about German colonial railways in 2028. Michael will talk about German colonial architecture from global survey to international conference and ICOMOS publication, just mentioned. And Michael, I'm looking forward to hear your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tino, and for organizing this event. I'm very grateful for presenting, and I'm also very happy to have Jens and Jaco with the great experts on the topics following my short introduction. I'm going to share my screen now. I hope it will work, and I hope you can see it. So I'm going to give a presentation as an introduction to embed our conference and publication project within a larger framework. Because some of you might have attended the conference or even read the publications, but not all of you. So I thought give you a larger framework of the whole thing. When we had the conference in November 23, just the same week, the Tagesschau, so the largest German broadcast public, reported on the German president being in Tanzania, I'm sorry, to meet the president there, and the news were that the German colonial period needs to be more investigated. And we happily followed this just some days later with our conference. So this was a very good incident to see how public awareness of the topic, public and political awareness comes together with our scientific and academic research. To give you a short overview on 3 slides, I want just to say that, of course, the investigations into German colonial period is not very new, but rather recent. So just 10 years ago, there was, on what you see on the left side, a large exhibition from the historical perspective in the German Historic Museum in Berlin. When years later, until today, questions on restitution of artifacts from the colonial period, pillaged and taken away from in the colonies, had been important. And in the commemorative and kind of travel guide literature, you see on the right side, Namibian sites had been incorporated in tourist infrastructure to highlight the ambivalent heritage that we are concerned with. When it comes to architecture, I'm happy that I saw Walter Peters also sharing or coming together with us today. So welcome. He counts as the great specialist and the first scientist or academic professor to investigate the German colonial architecture in Namibia. So back then, as German Southwest Africa, where you see the publication on the left side, and highly influenced, of course, everything what came afterwards. For example, what you see in the center, postcard collection being now collected and published, and framing architectural history in Namibia as a contact architecture by, for example, the presentation in 2020, what you see here. But what was interesting is that some 10 years ago, the scene for German colonial architecture was focused on area studies. That means there were many publications on an individual colony, but not so much a comprehensive idea of a larger global architectural history of the German colonial era, where the French, what you see on the left side, and the British were pioneering this research to give a global sense of the investigation. So I show you these 2 covers here. And that the German colonial period had been a global one, you would see here from this map from Mayer's Konversationslexikon of 1911, where you would see the 4 colonies in Africa. So we will focus today, of course, on German Southwest Africa, Namibia. But you would also see on the right side the giant area on Oceania, including Samoa, not even fitting on this map, so far away, including the Chinese period that you would highly be indicated on the map as Qingdao. Interestingly, I was thinking on reflecting or incorporating this desideratum on giving a larger global sense of German colonial period through architecture in the research project, which then helped us to conceive the conference and also the publication. So that's why I wanted to show you this double agenda, one on global architecture, German colonial architecture as a global project around 1900, and the transcultural, in a sense, shared built heritage questions of today. So when we focus on the first thing, including these edited volumes that I show you here, had just been possible by uniting so many excellent researchers, also hopefully also united here for this meeting today, on the publication you would see here, for example, in the center, the German colonial building cultures, had been an exhibition in Munich, and this is the exhibition catalog. And just recently, if you want to have more insights into the German colonial context in Oceania, this was just published and open access on the right side by Leuven University Press, so feel free to have a look on that. But again, our so-called neighbors, like the French ones here, were pioneering also the question of the global approach of heritage in terms of the colonial periods. So you would see here 2 publications from already 2005 and 2007 on patrimoine colonial in patrimoine, so the cultural heritage side of it. And this was investigated in the second part of this project when we decided to do the conference together. So as a basis, I spent quite some many months of a global survey to recreate a visual memory on what is actually still visible today, to have a global understanding of the whole typology still standing in public spaces around in the previous German colonies. And to do so, I just wanted to give you some short insights of the global aspect, because after me, we will focus on one specific case study, but it also needs to be embedded also in the larger context. So when we comes about the shared, the most dramatic consequence of being shared is also the issue of deletion of the physical memory of what we can share as cultural and colonial architecture. So the complete deletion. So what we would also see here in the old courthouse in Apia that has been just raised some years ago. So the sharing issue over an old building has been now deleted. And so this has been a constant reminder during my studies that so many buildings had been lost to create the discussion. Another one is a phenomenon of fragmentation and oblivion. So also a shared issue that we on both sides, on the German and the previous colonial, and so now independent sides, oblivion is a big problem. So for example, here, old telegraph station in Bukoba on the Victoria Lake are silent reminders, but without knowing that there has been the reinforced concrete pylons to have a telegraph station in between, those objects become silent and non-speaking anymore and not shared because the information around is lost. Or functional discontinuation I encountered when I photographed this old, previously the largest stone church in the Pacific, still standing in Pohnpei from the German colonial period. So neglect is also an aspect of shared responsibilities or unshared or non-responsibilities. Also, when buildings are out of use, the ongoing shared elements just by using it is out of discussion. So here we'd say an old train station in the Usambara Railway in Tanzania, maybe a great stage set for a Quentin Tarantino film, but it's one it's not used anymore. Also, the shared aspect has been lost. And the same is true for example, ruins that had been, but then turned into historic monuments and had been touristically commodified as museum spaces. So at least the ruins are intact, but out of function, but still used for touristic purposes, like the old Boma governmental police station in Bagamoyo, Tanzania, that you see here. Or the old coal mining area near Qingdao, the old area there had been turned into a museum site. So the sharing issue is a combined element of the built fabric that you can see and experience, but also you would walk inside and have a shared educational program of understanding colonial periods with all the violence and all the exploitation schemes behind. But structural replacement is a big issue where, for example, old colonial infrastructures like train systems are now gradually replaced and modernized. For example, here with the giant Chinese road and belt, the Neue Seidenstraßen project, where virtually all train lines in the African continent are gradually replaced by Chinese investment schemes. And this is a photograph that unites us today, but so I will not talk too much about it. But the issue that buildings are kept, but elements of the ideological background, like the question monument here on the left side, had been brought out of public sight. So the shared aspect is an ambivalent one. But when I took the photographs in 23, this was the case like here, but now times is continuing, and you will see that with Jens and Jaco speaking after me, that the site is still in reworking processes, in negotiation, and finally adaptation. But older German colonial period buildings might also be turned by adaptive reuse strategies into, for example, an arts and crafts center, like the old Governor's Palace in Lomé, arguably one of the largest colonial buildings ever built, but now turned into a museum site where contemporary African art is negotiated. So maybe something interesting to get in relation to the Alte Feste in Namibia, where now new projects are coming up. But also shared comes by functional continuities. For example, the largest train bridge ever built in the German colonial period over the Yellow River is still standing. So the shared element is not that much an emotional side or a cultural side, but the shared one is that it's still functioning as an infrastructure. So people are still using the object. So we're kind of sharing the infrastructural history behind it. The same might be true when, for example, hospital structures had been modernized, but still standing as protected monuments, and then modernized, like the Ocean Road Hospital in Dar es Salaam, arguably the largest hospital built in the German colonial period in Tanzania. Same true for train stations, like here the Kigoma train station and station in Tanzania today. Or religious functions. So there, of course, the shared element comes through religious practice, rituals, meetings, community gatherings. So the German colonial period buildings might still be a uniting factor for communities through the function. When it comes to a specific treatment, when it comes to be shared, is that, for example, sometimes commodification and colonial nostalgia might be in place, where, for example, you see here the old railway station in Qingdao had been razed to the ground and then reconstructed for nostalgic reasons to propagate old Qingdao from the colonial period. A very fascinating process, really rare. And the last element that I encountered is that even fake architectures in the colonial language had been made here, for example, in China, in Qingdao, for shopping centers. So the shared element is also an ambivalent one, but here is a completely fake one, but still worth to be considered in our discussion. So what happened in the introduction also to the conference, that I've been trying to see how sharing, how decolonizing processes and preservation strategies work together along different categories that I've been showing you today. And you will see that in the publication we had. When the conference took place, this global survey was just a basis, because what we wanted to discuss in the conference itself was not so much the global survey I did, but more the on-site discussions by experts to see how buildings are now renegotiated, modified, and commented on. So when it came to the conference, we had 6 different panels on international campaigns between Germany and the independent nation states by mapping, inventorying, evaluating, historic preservation, conservation, appropriation. We had the issue on use, tourism, and commodification, and the red circle around here is the presentation Jens presented together with Professor Peters. We also had colonial monuments and sites of memory, so how commemoration strategies come in, and the final section was on art installations. So it could also be an artistic comment to share contested histories through contemporary art practice. And this helped us to create our publication, which at the end, I can think we all can be very proud of that, because it was we brought together 27 contributions by 52 authors from 13 countries of 5 continents. So I think the whole project itself as a publication was a shared built project. I hope everybody can access it, because it's open access via ICOMOS Germany. So this is how we came along all together. And now I'm happy to hand over to Jens to now go into detail when it comes to our case study of today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, for this extended overview and still a very nice introduction to the topic. And I'm happy now to introduce Jens Wiedow, who is a researcher of Namibian architectural history and has been lecturing in the architecture department of the Namibia University of Science and Technology for 12 years, where he has also led design studios investigating the contemporary reuse of historical buildings. And currently he's finalizing his PhD at the BTU Cottbus. And his lecture, titled Investigating Shared Built Heritage Through Research and Teaching at the Alte Feste in Namibia, will present the history of a German colonial fort in Namibia, named Alte Feste, and also examine its historical reception and contemporary reappraisal through teaching. So Jens, the floor is yours.
A little bit of introduction to the colonial areas in Africa. On the left, a map of the German colonies from the Deutsche Colonial Atlas. Basically, it's Togo, Cameroon, East Africa, and probably the southernmost German colony in German Southwest Africa, which was occupied from about 1885 to just after the outbreak of World War One. 1915. On the right-hand side, another map of German Southwest Africa. Of course, the area was never empty. It was filled with different local tribes, Damara mainly in Herero in the middle, Ovambo in the north, and Nama towards the southern areas. From about 1885 around, the German colonial forces started sending off envoys to negotiate treaties to consolidate the settlement. As part of this entire project, a whole bunch of fortifications were erected by military troops starting about 1890. There are two phases that happened within this entire thing. Sorry, I'm jumping back and forth over here now. Roughly two phases, one under the first command of the German troops, Kurt von Francois, who established principally in the middle of Namibia to separate the country into two areas. The second phase of fortification construction happened then under Theodor Leitwein, his successor, to fortify the borders to South Africa and the neighboring Botswana, but also to fortify internal boundary essentially to Ovambo land in the north. So essentially consolidating the entire area or the entire territory through a network of fortifications and police stations. By the end of the German colonial period, there were about 25 major forts, which you can see illustrated over here, and up to about 100 smaller police stations, which were more or less fortified. Today, we will be focusing on the Alte Feste, which is the second fortification built in the territory. Construction started in 1890 and carried on till 1893. Was done by Kurt von Francois and his troops, but also aided by a whole bunch of, or a whole mixture of different type of African tribespeople who traveled along with the German colonial troops. So in some sense, we can already start talking about a shared heritage that comes along with it. The building itself is characterized by a rectangular open courtyard surrounded by a whole bunch of different accommodations that mainly deal with storage and all the things one would need for a colonial outpost. Most of the outside walls were provided with embrasures to shoot out and defend the entire building. Four bastions located on each corner, rotated by 45 degrees to offer additional protection to the entire building. We started mapping the entire history of the building quite early on, so almost immediately after its completion, more rooms were added towards the north and towards the east. A lot of the spaces were consolidated and turned into accommodation for troops and officers. By 1900, the entire West Wing was in such a bad state that it had to be completely demolished and rebuilt. By 1908, this is quite a significant period, which is the end of the Nama-Herero Wars. Most of the the building had a very radical change in that a lot of the embrasures were closed, the windows were opened up, and a lot of doorways were opened up towards the outside. And this is specifically significant on the north elevation, where you can see a new veranda was added, and the entire building started living towards the outside a lot more. So quite the opposite what one expect from a fort. By 1912, more internal changes had arisen or been executed. We can see at the bottom a perspective of 1912 with a Reiterdenkmal. And the building is almost being hidden by this forest of trees that was grown for climatic reasons, but also for construction timber, which was quite scarce. And the bastions were covered by these pyramidal roofs to deal with leaks from the odd rainfall. This Reiterdenkmal was erected in 1912, as I said, but also on a very problematic site, which is the north side of the Alte Feste, which was used as a prisoner of war camp during the Herero-Namba Wars. And these camps, sort of to a certain extent, also interpreted as concentration camps, contributed to about 40% of the inhabitants or casualties among the inhabitants or the people captured inside those places. So a very difficult history, which is very closely associated to the Alte Feste to this day. After the South African forces took over in World War I, the building continued being used for a short period as a military for the South African troops, for afterwards by the South African police, where a lot of quite radical changes had been implemented in the building fabric itself. For one, the entire east veranda, which you can see at the top over here, was demolished to allow for better cross ventilation of the entire eastern range. After these police period, the building was used as a school hostel for a while, and a lot of the smaller office spaces were consolidated into larger sleeping dormitories. And that happened between the 1920s and the 30s. The mandate Ministry of Education was utilizing the building as a school hostel for quite a while, and wanted to demolish the entire thing. So there was a big fight that started breaking out in the 1940s and 1950s. What should actually happen with this entire building? Ultimately, the Monuments Commission won the entire debate, and the building was repurposed as a museum. And for that particular purpose, there was the first major renovation in 1964, where not really much was done. However, quite a lot of the embrasures were discovered and reopened. The building, also the pyramidal roofs on the bastions, were removed completely. In the second period, in the 1980s, there was a second major renovation where the building was even more radically changed. The entire internal spaces were reconfigured to have a better flow for a museum circuit. And the entire northern veranda was demolished, and the windows closed up, bricked up, and replaced by embrasures. If these are real embrasures or imagined ones, this is a big question, which we are still figuring out. Finally, in the independent period, the building was continued being used along with a lot of the colonial statues, which dotted Namibia. So relatively unproblematically carried on. At the turn of the millennium, this changed. The Reiterdenkmal, for example, was decommissioned and taken away and placed inside the Alte Feste. And between 2008 and 2014, a new museum was built to the north of the Alte Feste, well, again, on the site of the old concentration camp, which remained unacknowledged or uncommented throughout this entire process. This new museum, the Namibian Independence Museum, which you can see in the background over here, was built primarily to commemorate the independence, War of Independence from about the 1960s onwards. What interests me, however, with this entire story is specifically what happened with the Alte Feste during the Mandate period and how it was appropriated and continued being used, and very much specifically figuring into a idea of nation building through heritage sites, through adopting these colonial heritage sites and turning them into a new settler history, which supported the entire apartheid agenda. So the building was featured quite heavily in a number of popular media. There were a lot of smaller histories written by sort of amateur historians, where the building was very much figured as a central feature of this colonial history, although its actual importance was relatively negligible in the German colonial period. Parallels to that can also be found in the history of Namatoni, which was a smaller fort along the northern edge of Namibia. The predecessor of the fort, which you can see at the top right-hand side, was completely demolished during attack by Ovambos. However, Ovambo tribes, however, was reconstructed as a large representative fort to deter more attacks, although it was relatively, there were not very many soldiers actually stationed in Tide. So it's actually more of a representational structure than anything else. This building fell into disuse during the 1930s. Same discussions happened, should one demolish it? Again, it was renovated and partially reconstructed, very much imaginatively after the entire fact in the 1954, I believe it was. So around about the same period as the Alte Feste. The entire question of dealing with this entire batch of historical and possibly very problematic historical buildings is something that we took up at the university through a teaching agenda where we investigated a number of these buildings, including the Alte Feste, with students. In this particular case, we did a inventorization and trying to understand the history of the entire building, work it up, while introducing the students into a survey of historical buildings, and then really started placing the focus on what do we do with it, how do we restore it, how do we demolish it potentially. So it was very much open for students to be allowed to develop their own positions with regards to how to deal with the building. Interesting, this is also a project to bring back the entire shared heritage aspect between students of the Namibian University of Science and Technology and architectural heritage students from the Hochschule Rhein-Main from Germany. So again, to look at the exchange of ideas and positions ultimately. And with that, I will pass on to Jaco, who will continue the discussion about the future of the building.
Thank you very much. And I would also like to introduce Jaco Wasserfall, who is a practicing architect and retired adjunct professor of architecture. He has been the principal of a multi-award-winning design studio in Windhoek, Namibia, since 1990. His interest and involvement with architectural heritage began with his 1989 PhD on early mine and railway housing in South Africa, and have continued throughout his professional career. And today he resides in a restored 1904 Otto Busch villa in Windhoek. Jaco Wasserfall will talk about designing with shared heritage in Namibia, a practice perspective. Please.
Well, thank you, Tino, for the introduction. It is a privilege to be part of this presentation tonight. So my contribution is entitled Designing with Shared Heritage in Namibia from a practice perspective, and the specific focus then being the adaptive reuse project of the Alte Feste. I'm going to share just a couple of images which in a way models the external adaptations to the Alte Feste that Jens has outlined in his presentation. More importantly, it chronicles this whole history of adaptive reuse of the Alte Feste. So if you run through it, I'm not going to comment on it. I just want to show you. We end up in 2014 with the completion of the Independence Memorial Museum, and the Alte Feste then ceased to exist and function as a museum. It was vacated and used for storage for the next decade. So the project background, by way of explanation, the Namibia Craft Center approached the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture in 2022 with a view to transforming the partially dilapidated complex into an arts, craft and heritage center of excellence. Quote, a public survey was launched to gauge support for the repurposing of the Alte Feste, and its positive outcome led to the signing of an MOU between the two entities, making the craft center legally responsible not only for fundraising, but also for the actual implementation of the project. This public-private collaboration is a first in Namibia and a unique feature of the Alte Feste project. In 2024, the ministry established a steering committee under this MOU to oversee the restoration of the old fort. So other key stakeholders involved in the steering committee's decision-making processes include the Ovaherero and Nama traditional authorities, the Namibian Heritage Council, and also the city of Windhoek. The bulk of the overall estimated renovation and repurposing costs of around 60 million Namibian dollars still needs to be raised. However, in 2024, the American Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation covered part of the first phase construction costs. But the funding was withdrawn soon after Donald Trump's election victory, forcing the Namibian government to step in and to provide the funding. More recently, the German embassy became involved in the project, and together with private sector donations, the costs for the first phase of the restoration have been secured. Now, within the larger urban context, the aim is for the repurposed Alte Feste to serve as a catalyst for urban renewal in the so-called Museum Mall, which is a project by the city of Windhoek, and which runs along Robert Mugabe Avenue from the south, San Majoma Avenue up to, in the north, the National Archives. Another important consideration was to explore meaningful ways of connecting what I call the three museum silos. Here you can see them, the IMM, the Independence Memorial Museum, the Alte Feste, and across the road, the National Museum. The most historically significant aspect of the museum trilogy, however, is the hitherto unacknowledged site of the concentration or prison of war camp during the Herero and Nama genocide, which needs to be incorporated fully and meaningfully in the new design. Turning to the proposed intervention, this is a physical model of the Alte Feste created when design work on the project commenced in 2023. The first design strategy was to enlarge the floor area with the existing building footprint, as the craft center is to be located in the west wing of the Alte Feste. The reinstated north veranda and south wing infill provided substantial additional space. The second strategy was then to double the Alte Feste's existing floor area by enclosing the courtyard with a light parasol roof, primarily intended as a gathering space. This addresses current climatic concerns, and this enclosed space will serve as a hub for the various programmatic elements and will accommodate a whole range of different activities. The eastern wing is dedicated to the new Genocide Museum. Here, the addition of a double volume exhibition space provides visual focus and offers much needed height for large scale exhibits. overlooking the site of the old concentration camp, the northeast tower will be employed as a portal and threshold to a commemorative place of contemplation. Now, the west wing was selected for the first phase of implementation due to its visual prominence, obviously, but also due to the restricted nature of available funding. Targeting the creation of a watertight building envelope, the first step entailed the replacement of the main roof. In fact, the only roof found in sound condition was the corrugated iron roof of the veranda. So the old corrugated roof of the west wing had numerous unfixable leaks, and it was also sagging badly due to structural support problems. Remedial work to the roof structure was followed by the installation of a screwless profile roof sheeting system, as you can see in the photographs. Also in dire need of replacement were the roofs of the two towers, where major leaks resulted in severe damage to the spaces below. During the removal of the existing roofs, various layers of older roofing were exposed underneath. Two completely new roofs were installed, again using screwless metal roofing system and box gutters. The problematic roofs of the triangular vestibules leading to the towers also needed replacement. It was decided to replace them with lowered concrete roofs with parapets to utilize the roof space for plant and equipment. So perhaps the most important strategic decision taken as part of the project design process was to leave the most recognizable west facade of the Alte Feste intact as far as possible. The renovation process began with the veranda's painted limestone plinth. It required careful manual stripping to prevent possible damage to the limestone and the removal of cement grouting. Both paint and cement acted to seal the walls, causing deterioration of the limestone. Badly weathered limestone blocks were replaced, and minor structural damage resulting from poor rainwater provision and vegetation was also repaired. After experimenting with various lime mortar mixes, the most suitable sample mixture was selected and used for pointing. After allowing for appropriate curing, the stone plinth was sealed with a special product that actually traps the moisture, that encourages the moisture trapped inside to evaporate and protects the surface from rainwater penetration. So here you see the next stage, which dealt with this damaged stone apron of the west wing, which was removed because we had to access the foundation of the veranda for inspection. And then after that, we carefully relayed the stones with proper provision for stormwater runoff. Next came the walls under the veranda. And here there are two types of wall. The one is the painted west facade, which could not be stripped because of the unplastered bricks that are basically just too soft. And the plain paint and plaster of the two tower walls were then removed, exposing the extent of termite infestation, and revealed interesting changes in the fenestration and doorway of the tower. So these walls were reinforced to prevent further movement and refinished using a lime-based plaster. Bricked up openings were acknowledged by introducing a V-joint in the plaster. From here, the focus moved to the veranda floor and roof. Remedial work to the floor included removing, re-leveling, and relaying the flagstone pavers with proper provision for channeling stormwater runoff. You can also see on the photograph that we stripped the main roof beams to expose the original Oregon pine. This slide I thought of including because it highlights some of the unexpected discoveries made during this process. So if you look at the top elevation, it shows an overall floor slope across the building length of some 320 millimeters, which if you look at the elevation is not a lot, but once you start with work and the placement of doors and windows, it becomes highly problematic. On the left at the bottom, you see some ornate hand-painted murals that we discovered in the roof space of the entrance. And in the middle, you see one of the roofs that we uncovered, one of the tower roofs, complete with its valley gutter that runs diagonally across. And then the last picture shows remnants of the original lean-to guardhouse structure, which was also quite a surprise. Now, if we go to the inside of the building, here the approach was completely different. So interior renovation approach was to strip all applied finishes and to expose the rich layered narrative of past additions and alterations. So the first thing that we looked at was the floor, which was later installed. It was installed over and floated over the original stone floor. And due to its condition and the complicated level changes, it was removed. Disappointingly, though, we could not reuse the stone floor underneath because of the way that the timber floor was actually fixed and damaged the floor. It was therefore decided to replace the entire floor of the west wing with a polished concrete floor using stone from a nearby quarry to the south of Windhoek. The demolished cross walls of the original cellular room configuration are acknowledged in this floor, as you can see on the slide here. And the floor of the southern tower vestibule will remain as is, but we will polish it. That is this sample of the polishing. The painstaking stripping of paint and loose plaster from the longitudinal walls of the west wing revealed a rich tapestry of different plasters, mud, lime, and cement, exposed brickwork arches, previous alterations, doorways, windows, and the obvious termite tunneling, as you can see in the top photographs. The bottom picture is a render of the proposed interior wall facade treatment with a lime-plastered plinth and window surrounds, and reveals the remaining wall surfaces will be carefully repaired, sealed, and lightly lime-washed. The cross walls within the west wing required structural reinforcement as they were detaching from the courtyard wall to the east. So this presented an opportunity to create larger openings at the center of all cross walls. In the process, visually connecting the different rooms and exhibition spaces, The old door openings will be bricked up using salvaged bricks from the site and then plastered with lime. The old ceilings, both linen and timber, were in poor condition and will be replaced with new skimmed ceilings, complete with integrated lighting and hanging systems. Ceiling pockets running along all walls will house lighting to wash the walls, the wall surfaces, and hide the evaporative cooling in and outlets. The old linen ceilings will feature in 2 ceiling recesses located above on either side of the new connecting doors, and the salvaged floor planking will be repurposed as the foyer entrance. Finally, in conclusion, I just want to show you this presentation, AI, which really conveys the essence of the intended interior look and the feel of the renovated Alte Feste gallery spaces. Here you can see the effect of the warm light washing down the walls, and the manner in which the new doors link the various spaces, adjacent spaces, visually. And that then concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaco. Yeah, thank you to the three of you. I think this was a good introduction to the topic, and now we are very familiar with the building. Everyone now has the opportunity to ask questions by either raising your hand or writing your question into the chat. I would like to start with the first question, more generic one, but I have unfortunately never been to Namibia. I knew the Alte Feste from pictures and presentations, and your presentation was very comprehensive now. I have a question regarding the status of this place today. So what is it actually for the people in Namibia? Is this an appreciated piece of heritage, or is it really a contested site where there are very different opinions about? I would really like to locate this a little bit within the complex Namibian society. Maybe this goes to Jens and Jaco, so please.
If I may start, I think, yes, it is very much a contested site. As you saw from the makeup of the steering committee, the key sort of shareholders, if you want to call it that, include the various traditional authorities. And I think there's a huge difference in the expectations that they have versus the expectations, say, of the ministry, and certainly those of the craft center. It is not a process that we can resolve overnight. I think it is a pity that the negotiations with the affected communities took such a long time to get started. It's a very slow process. And even amongst the contested communities, they have completely different ideas of how to utilize this building. So I don't think this will be resolved overnight. It is part of an ongoing discussion. And Jens can fill in more about the idea of this being a contested space.
Yeah, thanks, Jaco. I think it's a question of who you ask in Namibia. I mean, Namibia is really made up of an incredibly diverse population group. There are many sort of perhaps old remnants of the German settler community who really see that as part of their important heritage. On the other side, you have the Herero or Nama who see it very differently, but also place value in this, and this is quite important. However, there's also the majority of Namibians who don't know about this history at all, especially the younger generation. I mean, if you think about it, the average population or average age of Namibian population is under 30 now, I think, Jaco. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to actually start communicating this history, problematic or not, or the distinctions between those two a younger generation in Namibia specifically. Not to mention the tourists who come to Namibia who also need to critically be able to engage with these buildings.
Thank you. Do you observe also among the German tourists, people who come really to see the colonial legacy, or is there no difference as compared to other tourists from around the world?
Yeah, I think it's a funny. Jaco will probably have lots of stories to tell. Every site meeting, there will be people just wandering in, wanting to take some photos, and very much have a lot of interest in the building. So I think it's one of the main attractions on a sort of a tourist roadmap of Windhoek, if you may. Again, I find it a little bit problematic that there's no real exhibits or anything or explanation plaques to tell people what this is about. But certainly, I mean, there's a lot of interest in that. I'm not too sure to what extent this is more of a critical interest or more of perhaps a nostalgic interest in these legacies that I can't really answer that.
I thought that just to comment on this element, because when I traveled to all previous German colonies, I recognized that, first of all, the memory on the German colonial period highly depends on what came afterwards. So there's no inhabitant on this planet to remember German colonial period in person anymore, because that's simply not possible. It's more than 100 years ago. So it's also a question of which kind of regime came afterwards and how this regime, there were all new colonial regimes over every German colony, the French, the British, the New Zealanders, the Australians in Papua New Guinea, and the South Africans over Namibia. So what I recognize is that appreciation, or let's say the acknowledgement or the awareness of the German period highly depends on the regime that has still been remembered by the local people, let's say 20, 30 years ago. And when I first came to Namibia, it was because it's a simple issue. And my mother said, "Do you know that actually large parts of Namibia are still speaking German?" Because there's still many German-speaking people in the country, which is completely different than to any other previous colony. There's virtually no German-speaking inhabitants anymore in Togo or Cameroon, or in maybe some in Tanzania, but virtually no one in the Pacific. So I think this is also relevant when Jens, you talked about the German awareness, is that also Namibian citizens are remembering German periods because they are affiliated with German relatives, maybe still going on today. I think this is a specific aspect in the Namibian history, I guess.
Thank you. We have two questions from the audience. I think first was Pakinam Said. So if you unmute your microphone and please ask or comment.
Right. So I tried to open my camera so that it wouldn't sound robotic, but I wasn't. I don't have the permission to do that. So I'm just gonna share my voice with you. Yeah, right now. Okay,
here you
good.
go.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the interesting insights and valuable contributions. I am tempted to ask that within the shared built heritage scope of the Arbeitsgruppe, did native experts and locals take part in any stage of the project's considerations? If not, this is a follow-up question. Do you intend to overcome this by inviting more non-German voices to allow the championing of the term de-colonial or transkulturelle Kulturerbe? And my final question, I mean, there are three parts. Shared was mentioned as a keyword repeatedly, holding sometimes vague, other times clear connotations. How would you interpret shared? This is my question to all three of you. How would you interpret shared in the project scope? And is it enough to include a genocide part in the museum, such as in the case of the Alte Feste? Or do natives get a say in what to have included in the building? Thank you.
Yeah, I think as part of this entire working group and strategy group set up by the ministry, there is very much an involvement of the indigenous voices, ultimately, if you can put it that way. So the non-German voices that contribute towards what should happen in there. Again, this is a negotiation that is ongoing. I think the big problem is, which we're facing, it seems, is that the expectations are very broad, and it is still a historical building that needs to be dealt with relatively sensitively to maintain its possibly dissonant value, but also shared value. And I think just the process of being able to sit around the table starts this entire discussion. Now, having said that, it's a bit of a problem in Namibia because there are very few specialists who deal with built heritage to start off with. And primarily the specialists like perhaps me or Jaco, we have the sort of European background, we were taught outside of Namibia at the schools. However, it is a very important, or was a very important aspect for me to train up Namibians, non-white Namibians, to start thinking about these particular aspects and to start looking at how does one actually go about it in a number of different ways and develop approaches. So as of yet, within the technical part of the steering committee, it is primarily dominated by people with a European background, certainly. However, in the larger strategic discussions, the voices of specifically the affected communities of the genocide play a very important role.
I think if I could add to that, I think there's certainly, a deeper effort as launched by the ministry to involve all of the affected communities. There's also the desire, and they have approached different academic institutions to assist. So the biggest problem is you can't start designing a building if you don't have a design brief. And the problem is at the moment that for the genocide portion of this, there is no brief as yet. And it will take some time to get there. I think historically, we're also dealing with another problem. So there was a lot of unhappiness from the affected communities, not only because of the way that the Independence Memorial Museum is located on the site, the fact that the site isn't acknowledged, and that the whole genocide portion of history is sort of restricted to one room within the museum. To complicate matters, I think there's the whole ongoing saga of talks between the Namibian and the German governments in terms of the money. And I think there the biggest problem is that there's a lot of anger or dissatisfaction from the affected communities because they were never made party to the negotiations. So they've always felt sidelined, and that is complicating our process tremendously.
Thank you. And there was a third part on this difficult notion of shared. Maybe that's something for you, Michael, to address.
Yeah, I mean, what I found interesting is that, Jaco, when you showed the kind of steering committee or the setup of the project with, the building inside and coming all the different stakeholders and periods and things, what I find always interesting is that I have the impression that now a discussion on the shared comes also with commemorating German guilt and the German genocide issue, which is absolutely most important. But on the other hand, we also have, as a unique case in Namibia, a second colonial wave over the building. So this needs to be also told because South African colonialism over Namibia was also very difficult. So I think I would think that sharing is also sharing the responsibilities and sharing in terms of storytelling. So it's not only a German colonial building, because then you would limit it to colonial to German and non-German. But I mean, there's also a South African story in it. With apartheid regime coming over a country. So maybe this can also be told. But what I also found interesting is in the very sense of the mandate period of South Africa, the sharing element was a very different one that, for example, they opened it up as a hostel, as far as I remember. So the shared also came with access by maybe not privileged people to live in it and now it's going to be commodified into a heritage center, to a culture center, to a nostalgic kind of environment where you would go shopping. But whereas in this ambivalent mandate, South African mandate period, the building opened up as a very basic use for younger generations to live in it. And I think this is also a very interesting aspect that but this aspect has not been considered in the in the proposals yet. No, so that so example, sharing is also a question of access to the building. So who would finally access the building when it's adopted? It will be tourists, educated people interested in history, but not so much maybe the younger generation in terms of having fun or just having friends over to use it as a youth hostel. So I find this is very interesting when it comes to the shared.
Okay, thank you for your view. I would hand over to Walter Peters, who was the next to raise his hand, please.
Thank you, Tino, and good afternoon, everybody. And this is nothing like the difficult questions just posed. They are serious and very serious. This is easy, though. I'm delighted to see that the Alte Feste is going to become part of Namibia. It was very much a sideline situation, and I think that getting this kind of use will really make it relevant to the new circumstances, which I'm very grateful is happening. I was also a little bit surprised in Jens's publication or his presentation. I hadn't actually, well, maybe he didn't realize right from the start the troops weren't accommodated in the Alte Feste. They were accommodated elsewhere. The Alte Feste really served as resources and getting things ready and so forth. But later they were accommodated over there. But I was interested to see how all the doors were open to the north elevation. North veranda. I hadn't realized that all these doors open to that yet. But then I'm really pleased that the restoration has fallen into the hands of Jaco, and I'm delighted to see the surprises which you've discovered, which of course is not unusual when you do restoration work, which goes back 100 and something years, but still very surprising things. And I'm just a little bit, I'm grateful that you're using lime and you've got the right mixes, but I'm a little concerned when I hear about concrete roof to the towers. Concrete shrinks as it dries. I'm sure you've taken care of that, but there's weight on these bricks, which of course we never baked. And then of course you're adding steel channels, which is another thing I'm very cautious about. They look wonderful, but I hope you know what you're doing, Jaco. I'm sure you do. So I'm pleased they're in your hands. But thank you very much. I'm really pleased that the Alte Feste will become something important again and be taken seriously, I hope. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Peter. To the question of accommodating troops, you're quite right. It appears that there was actually a small building built in the courtyard while the Alte Feste was being built to accommodate the troops right at the beginning. We have yet to still find evidence of that. I managed to convince Jaco to get the contractor to excavate about 0.5 meter of the inside of the soil to try and find something. But we haven't really found anything, remnants of that yet. But certainly, I think a lot of the earlier photos do show that the barracks were then very quickly happening on the outside of the building, pretty much right after it was completed. I think the primary focus was just to get the building built and to have some sort of defensible structure over there for the meantime until you get the resources together to carry on construction, which surprisingly happened very, very quickly in Windhoek. On the other side, on the restoration strategies, I'm also involved in this still, and I'm definitely putting Jaco through his paces when it comes to a lot of this decision making to try and preserve as much as possible. I share the sentiments with the concrete roofs. We've got a very sensitive structural engineer on board who has dealt with historical structures with his experience in England, I believe. And I think he has a certain sensibilities that go along with that. So we're being very careful, but again, certain things just have to happen, unfortunately. And I still feel as long as it is properly documented, we can give a little bit of leeway. But anyway, I'll let Jaco answer a lot of the other technicalities.
Good evening, Wally. Thank you for your comment. Yes, I agree. It is, in many ways, I think it's unusual to use the steel. I think it has to do with our approach to the restoration. So wherever we are introducing something or a new element, we prefer to work in a new material, and that has its problems. As Jens says, the engineer is very sensitive in terms of his approach, and we've looked at many different other ways of introducing services that are needed in the building. So, when you spoke of, the movement, etc., etc., I mean, Jens will know that the biggest problem that we're having with the structural stability of the east wall, the east-facing wall to the courtyard, is actually caused by the introduction of electrical services. So there's a whole bunch of electrical conduits running at the bottom of the wall, and many things, the rising damp, but also the way that the building was, the internal walls were painted with basically a paint that doesn't allow for the evaporation of damp. Especially the southern section of the west wing, we have serious problems in terms of the structure. So during the next phase, when we do the roof, we will also have to tie that wall to the structure of the roof. There's evidence, as I showed, all the cross walls are, detaching from that east wall. But that's not a new history, as Jens will tell you, because, from the word go almost, they were erecting these buttresses within the courtyard to support the wall structurally. I think our biggest problem is that it's also an advantage that we're approaching this, in a very, very sort of slow, experimental way. So there's nothing done and decided beforehand. So we're basically opening up, and it's this investigative journey that we then record everything that we find, which I think is a wonderful way of just establishing proper records, which we don't have at the moment. But it is also, just a question of money. So in many ways, your intervention internally will in a way be complemented by something that happens externally, and we're seeing it all the time. And in certain respects, we are using traditional methods of tying in structures. It is just expressed slightly different. So I feel when looking at these, I want to be able to recognize it as something that was done later in terms of the building, and not something which is, a copy of something of a method that was employed 60 to 100 years ago. I'm not answering your question, but anyway.
No, I agree with the last. I just would have looked towards timber instead of steel. But anyway, thank you very much, Jaco. I'm so grateful for your hands.
Thank you. Next question comes from Coco Agbanyo. Can you hear us, or can you yeah.
Yeah, okay, now it's okay. I want to greet everybody of you. I'm from Togo, and once I met Mr. Michael Falza at the University of Lomé. And my question is to Mr. Wasserfall about the renovation and the protection of the former colonial building in Africa. In our case, we have Palais de Lomé. Palais de Lomé was renovated by the French architects. So people are joined from Togo, are joined them to cover the work. But in the context of the post-colonial, I mean that that seeks like the continuation of colonial domination. So I want to know whether when today we have our independence, people in Europe, they are in Europe, we are in Togo also, or in Africa. Why, when such projects are there, people of Europe can come again to take part or to lead such a project in our countries? That's my question.
Thank you, Koku.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's okay. No, go for it.
Michael, you can please go.
I just wanted to thank you because the Palais de Lomé, first of all, it's interesting that the building had been reintroduced in French language, which is still one of the official languages in Togo, but you're right. And then I found it very interesting because in our book, also the acting director of the museum is also brought in to present the case study. And she was Mrs. Lawson, and she said,
Yeah.
we are not going to do a commemorative site of the Palais de Lomé, but we are going to install a contemporary art and culture center for African culture. So she said, we are going to restore the building because it's the frame, but inside we are not doing any colonial nostalgia nor panels. We want to have contemporary debates, contemporary African artists coming in to do their contemporary artwork. And I found this is a very interesting site of comparison to Alte Feste. I think it's a different approach. So I just wanted to add this because I was really fascinated by coming to Lomé and study this. Thank you very much.
Okay.
From my side, I think maybe the Alte Feste building is different. You know, I'm a fourth generation Namibian. There are many Namibians involved, not only on the steering committee, but also in putting together a curation strategy. And no doubt, in the end, how I see this is that it is something which will represent a common language. I don't think it is just by nature of what the building is going to be, a genocide museum and a craft center. That already pulls in, just about the entire community of Namibia. And I think from the craft center side and certainly the ministry, there's a lot of goodwill and a lot of people that are contributing in a meaningful way to this process. It's just that I am, I guess, the architect. And in a way, by virtue of being the architect, I do the presentation, but it's not necessarily a reflection of my own ideas. It is a collective effort.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have, another question by Jonas Prinsleve.
Yes, thank you very much. I am calling in from Hamburg. I am the officer for decolonization of the City-State Ministry for Media and Culture. My colleague, Ms. Mühlstedt, was also here, but she left already. She's responsible for the UNESCO World Heritage, the historic warehouse district and office district in Hamburg. I had a comment and a question as well. my comment was perhaps on the efforts to preserve, but also, support the critical heritage in Namibia on the colonial war and on the genocide that, as some of you also already mentioned, this is of course happening in a context of sort of yet unresolved post-colonial struggles over reparative justice, redistribution of land, but also recognition and memory. And I just, beyond the technical questions, I just find this really interesting, the role that, heritage management or cultural heritage can play in, if not affecting legal or political reconciliation, but at least including some sort of recognition and sort of a distribution of power in the sense of who gets to speak on history. And I just wanted to comment on this. This is in groups of experts who work on this is obviously an important factor to be aware of. And my question was perhaps to Tino Maga, because in Hamburg we have this. Well, more generally, my question would be: we've talked a lot about German colonial architecture outside of Germany. I know a few sites inside Germany. I know that in Germany there's a discussion on how colonial heritage or colonial memory will and could be included in sort of institutionalized frameworks of critical memory in Germany. And a lot of times the aspects of authentic sites is also brought into the discussion, because a lot of the violence happened over there and not here. Yet there are sites in Germany. So this would be one question. And another question would be for Hamburg specifically. Now I work for the ministry, but when I did my PhD, I worked on this area in the harbor, also around the memory politics there. And I was amazed that the city of Hamburg managed to apply for recognition of World Heritage status with this area and managed to not mention the colonial ties and trades of goods that is related to this architecture, but also the ICOMOS evaluation of the application, which was favorably in the end, managed to not a single word mention the colonial or imperial or global aspects of the trade that was behind also the financing of this indeed amazing architecture. So my question would be, how does the ICOMOS office now support or approaches these kind of sites not only in terms of preservation, but also in terms of educational or cultural mediation to include sort of a post-colonial approach?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. The sites in Germany where a lot, or at least part of the violence has been planned and then also organized. We're also part of our conference, so there was a whole section dedicated on these sites because we also think this is very important. And it is still, I think, if we compare Germany to other countries, especially Netherlands, but also France or the UK, I think the research of colonialism and also the legacy of built heritage of colonialism is not so much advanced, I think, in comparison. So there's still a lot to do. It's still a lot to discover. It's also difficult sometimes to really see and recognize which built heritage within Germany relates to the colonial times and the colonial empire. So there's still a lot to do. And also today, when we do this online lecture, this is also, let's say in the end, also a call to our members from ICOMOS Germany to engage with this topic, to maybe join the shared built heritage working group and really to create a community to really research on this topic. When we did the conference in 23 in Munich, we were the first to really researching and discovering the German built legacy. So it's really just the beginning. And I'm also very happy to see that we have a very international audience today, because I think all the different perspectives are super important, and also critical questions, because they help us to think further and to get a more comprehensive, more complete picture. What you mentioned with the World Heritage Site, this is, I would say, generally an issue. There are a lot of sites where colonialism and the effects of colonialism are not recognized. A famous example is also Amsterdam, where this 17th century extension of the Canal Ring is a World Heritage Site, a place that is inscribed in the World Heritage List as a place of freedom of religion, of humanist thought. The colonial empire is not mentioned at all in the whole nomination, and also not the slave trade. And a lot of money that was used to build up this part, which is now World Heritage Site, comes from slave trade. And we have even, you can even see this in the built environment. There are definite hints to this, but it has not been researched properly or recognized at the time of inscription. ICOMOS now, in the first place, does an evaluation of the state of conservation, of the authenticity, really, of the say, material site of a potential World Heritage Site. We do not select the site, we do not select the criteria, we do not define the outstanding universal value. ICOMOS is really giving an assessment and how far this is a well-conserved, well-preserved site, etc. And also these evaluations are written by individuals. This is also, it is very complicated to get an overall or to speak about a comprehensive overall approach, because individual ICOMOS members do this in other countries. And I think with the whole, is much better than I or most of us, but I also think the whole challenge of decolonialization, also to investigate this scientifically, there's still so much to do. We only now see the first retributions of museum objects, etc. And also just to be aware of this site of potential World Heritage Sites or monuments. It just started, and much too late, of course, but there's still a lot to do. And I expect that in the future that the sensibility for this topic just needs to increase, will increase, hopefully, and then that we also can avoid these mistakes in nominating World Heritage and forget to tell what it actually is and what the wealth that we honor is based upon. And I also think this is a problem, because once inscribed in the World Heritage List, you have this site there, and usually the outstanding universal value also is retrospectively never being changed. So there is a very small chance that these sides of the history being acknowledged. But I can only hope that this will be a discussion in the near future, and that we at least try to, or that the World Heritage Sites also feel some responsibility and work on their history, and also attribute this part of their history in their display of the sites or in the presentation of these sites. But thank you for the question.
Thanks for the answer.
It is now, it is already 7 o'clock, so this was also the intended time of ending the lecture today. If you still have questions or so, please reach out to us. You can write to us. You can write to, I think you got from wherever you got the invitation or the email communication, or you write at ICOMOS.de. You find this on the ICOMOS Germany website, our communication. So we are happy to get in touch, to reach out, and we would also be happy to see you again in a possible follow-up session. I hope we can plan something like this, and also share with us your interest in the topic. And maybe if you're part of ICOMOS Germany or Austria or surrounding topics, or also another ICOMOS committee, maybe there are opportunities to work together. And also there's, of course, an international scientific committee on shared built heritage. That would also be another opportunity to get, our perspectives together. Thank you very much, Michael, Jens, and Jaco, for your contributions. Thanks to everyone who asked questions or who's still about to ask questions, and all of you for participating in this. And I hope we can continue this in the near future.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining. And do not hesitate to send email questions also directly to us if this is necessary. And do not forget to download our open access publication. That's why we did it. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.